Hey, my name's Austin. I'm a senior product designer here at GitLab. Today, I'm going to be presenting on why I think you should not sleep on documentation when it comes to UX. So as a UX designer, maybe you run into this scenario, but have you ever been asked to design this portion of something, but forget about the rest of the iceberg? Because that's kind of what happened to me with a particular instance recently when I first joined GitLab, and then it just recently reached production. So we're going to talk through that today. So how this all started, I first joined GitLab, I was about a month into my contributions, and my PM came to me with what felt like a really simple request. He was asking me to just, hey, help me be able to point to a specific file in GitLab. At the time, I didn't truly understand what this meant, but this file was meant to help enforce pipeline compliance. So today, projects can define individual pipelines for their projects, but there are instances where organizations have thousands of projects, and they just want to set some sensible defaults that can't be overridden by projects. So I was like, yeah, this sounds great. Let's just put input field in this area of the settings, boom, done. And then what followed was a lot of technical discussion that I did not follow at the time. There's a lot of things passed around about YAML and pointing to things through mermaid diagrams, and then explicitly talking about how to build these things through variables and triggers and includes. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I hope my design's okay because no one else has really said anything about it yet. I was just sitting there thinking, hey, does like form validation sound good? Like we should probably make sure that this file exists before we let users, hit save changes on that setting page. And the problem was I wasn't focused on the more holistic journey, like what happens as you're going in to author that file, or what happens once you've saved it and it's making changes downstream. I was just very focused on just being able to reference it somewhere in GitLab. To take a quick aside here, so what are we trying to do for Cameron, the main persona of my group? Well, we're simply trying to make their workflow a little bit easier and a little bit less monotonous. So this can look like removing steps, like taking away the need to track non-compliance. So being able to enforce pipelines is one way that can help reduce compliance effort, or making things a little bit easier by defining these rules and settings in GitLab. All right, so back to the example. So that design kind of was sitting there, and it went through solution validation. We felt pretty confident about what we were going forward with. We pinged some different groups for some feedback, and it sat there for a while. At some point earlier this year, it ended up in the planning breakdown stage, scheduled into a milestone, and then we shipped it. And I was just sitting there thinking, hey, I hope this goes well. The initial feedback we got was actually really great. Our customers were very excited about it. It gave them a lot of the control that they were looking for. It was driving a lot of ultimate conversations, which is really great from a revenue perspective. But what I saw show up really quickly was a lot of questions from our TAMs, so our sales team that interact with customers, trying to provide examples and help them troubleshoot problems. What this was telling me was our docs were too thin. I couldn't find an older version of the docs to show here. This is a more recent example, but we didn't provide enough contextual examples in documentation to really help guide both GitLab team members and our customers through the steps necessary to help do the task at hand. We just were like, hey, yeah, you can define this file somewhere and good luck to you. We think you know what to do best. And that's not really the case. We need that to really help guide users through a great experience. So we're focused back on trying to supplement that surrounding relationship. I've simplified it still here. And we're trying to show what happens downstream. How do you even begin about authoring that file itself? And then also trying to bolster up the documentation piece. We really want to bring in more examples that are specific to Cameron to help show best practices or even use cases that maybe others don't think about. Oftentimes we hear from customers asking, hey, what do other companies like us do in this scenario? We kind of know the goal we want to go towards, but we don't know how to do it ourselves necessarily. So keeping that user flow in mind, keeping those assumptions at the forefront can really help extend our documentation and make it useful. I came across this awesome quote somewhere on the internet. regarding our docs, I saw a user was trying to troubleshoot how to set something up, and they found an example, they copy pasted it into their environment, and they're like, hey, I don't know how this works. It seems magical, but it just worked. I could just copy and paste it. So I think more things like that will get users excited and keep them involved in GitLab and making our product more useful in the end. So the lesson to be learned here is don't sleep on documentation, keep building it up. I definitely slept on it and I'm paying the price for it today. So with that, I'll open up to questions. If you want to just ask them directly, or if you'd like to throw them into the Google Doc, that's cool too.
Thanks for that, Austin. One thing I was wondering is, you said that this was one of the first projects you worked on, and you clearly learned from this. How do you do things differently now?
I think it definitely starts with better cross-stage collaboration. So an example of this would be, I should have been engaging with pipeline authoring and pipeline execution way, way, way earlier. Like sometime last fall, we should have been collaborating on this idea rather than addressing that supplemental experience now. It is a cool way to show like we release something very small and it's already having an impact and we have an opportunity to continue improving on it. But there are definitely some quick wins that we're going after now that we could have addressed in the past. So that, and then additionally, I wasn't spending much time reviewing documentation changes. I was leaning pretty heavily on just assuming tech writing handled that, but not thinking about helping provide use cases. So I think oftentimes we just ask tech writing to just, hey, just help us write documentation, but we might have better context to help supplement that. And so I definitely want to spend more time in those MRs where the documentation is being updated to see if I can help supplement an example or rephrase something to make it more obvious.
That makes sense. Nick, you had a question?
I think your last point sort of segues to this nicely, but how do you think from the past experience that you had and the fact that documentation is such a huge part of the GitLab UX user experience, how do you think designers and tech writers, as well as the broader team, can sort of collaborate more effectively on the doc experience and how that overlaps with the UI experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of the collaboration is going to happen within merge requests. I think what often I don't consider when I'm doing a review in a merge request, like around the UI, is I conceptually know, because I've had so many conversations over weeks or months of how to set things up, how to make sure that I don't get into a situation where I break something, because I've caught all those edge cases, but those edge cases might not be in the documentation yet. And so keeping all that in mind, almost using docs as like your companion when you're doing the review. Like, do you need to answer a question? And if the question isn't answered already in docs, try and see if you can add that to it.
That's a great piece of advice. Thank you.
Sure. Susan, you had a point. Did you want to share that one?
Sure, I was making sure I was not muted. So the way that we work at GitLab is engineers write the first draft of the doc, engineers or PMs, and then writers take it and turn it into documentation. So writers don't always have all of the context of how this feature should be written from the user perspective, which is one of the things we add is the user perspective. So anything that you can add about the user perspective is going to be helpful. A lot of documentation, the first draft is written from an engineering perspective. So I love this topic. Thank you very much for sharing it. Yay.
Yeah, glad to hear it reinforces some of our important principles here. But yeah, it was a big thing for me as well, just trying to understand how to set it up myself. Like once we had it running in production, I was like, all right, I have examples from comments that I'm relying off of from past history. those things definitely don't exist in documentation yet. And so at least helping surface some of those things that we use to set up the feature itself is a great way to get started.
Christy, did you want to verbalize?
Sure.
Your-
I actually edited my comment in the agenda because I had a but in there that made me sound like I was disagreeing with Susan, but I was actually agreeing with Susan, which is, oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, tech writers, they're not going to, they haven't been involved in the process the way that designers have and PMs have. So they're not going to know what this context is. But as they are doing editorial work, they can absolutely help to get it added in a sensible way. It's for a designer to say like, hey, let me tell you more about this and why it's important and how it gets used. And this is a critical part of the process that, Austin, you're right. We don't we don't generally do this. The more that we can do this, the better user experience we're going to create. So this is like this is the type of evolution in our thinking about the user journey that I'm really, really excited to see.
Yeah, me too. I'd love to see less questions that could be definitely answered in docs in Slack. That would be great, a great outcome. Cool. I'm not seeing any new questions, just some more read-only comments. So Justin, I'll stop sharing and stop the recording, I guess.
Perfect.